to the Discipline Priest PvE overview for patch 4.0.1. About 2,300 of you have taken a look at my Discipline Healing Tips video so far, and the feedback has been pretty positive, so I just want to say thank you to all who watched. I got a couple requests to make a more comprehensive guide for spec, glyphs, and gear choices, and I've seen some demand on the Priest forums for a guide of that nature as well. This video will be broken down into 3 sections, and I'll include some annotations for quick reference. First, let's start with the new talents. After you've chosen the discipline tree, the first tier includes Improved Power Word Shield, Twin Disciplines, and Mental Agility. A good deal of discipline talents will be focused around buffing up Power Word Shield, so it's a good rule of thumb to focus on them. Mental Agility will affect Power Word Shield, Prayer of Mending, and Renew. Channeled spells and spells with a cast time don't benefit from the mana reduction. The result is that Holy Priests will actually get more use out of Mental Agility than Discipline Priests will, but because it affects Power Word Shield, it's still incredibly useful. There should be room in the tree to come back to Twin Disciplines for the increased healing anyway, but I'll take it point by point for now. As it turns out, Evangelism and Archangel are strangely controversial. I've seen people requesting guides to specs for builds that include it and those that don't, but to be honest, there's not a more attractive place to put the 5 points, at least not for PvE. When I'm finished with the build, feel free to look back over it and see if there's somewhere else you'd rather slip these 5 points, but the tree was clearly designed by Blizzard to make use of Smite. Yes, I'm aware of all the people who are going to say there's just no room for smiting in heroic ICC 25 man, but I'm just gonna come straight out and say, yes there is. And either way, it's a mechanic you're supposed to be getting used to for Cataclysm content. Anyway, on that note, putting the points into Evangelism and Archangel is well worth it. If you'd like to see how the talents work in practice, I'll include another annotation with a link to my Discipline Healing Tips video where it talks about these new talents. Inner Sanctum is on this tier, but it's much more of a PvP talent than anything else, as it reduces your incoming damage and gives you extra movement speed when using Inner Will. Soul Warding, on the other hand, almost gets rid of the cooldown on Power Word Shield, so your other 2 points for the tier should go there. Pretty much everything on the 3rd tier is useful. Renewed Hope gives your heals an increased chance to crit on targets affected by Weakened Soul or Grace, which effectively means more Divine Aegis procs, and once you hit 85 and have room to pick up Inspiration in the Holy Tree, more damage reduction procs. Power Infusion is a great tool to give your casters a burst of DPS when not using Bloodlust, or to give yourself some better efficiency. Need some on-demand quick heals? Instead of spamming Flash Heal, why not Power Infuse yourself and start using Greater Heal, especially when combined with Inner Focus. Again, Atonement is one of those tree-defining talents that Blizzard just put in. It will make all of your smites heal nearby allies for the same amount of damage you just did, which makes Smite more effective for small healing than the spell called Heal, at the same time building your stacks of Evangelism. Once more, if you'd like to see how Atonement works in practice, check the link to the Discipline Healing Tips video. We'll come back to Inner Focus in a moment. Rapture has been nerfed in a minor way, but buffed in a major way. It lost its Energize effect, but had its cooldown reduced in half. Rapture also restores mana based on your total mana pool, not your base, and with the much larger pools you're going to have in Cataclysm, this makes Rapture give you back more mana than Power Word Shield will cost. Rapture is the talent that will make you an efficient healer. You absolutely cannot skip over this one. Borrowed Time is another one of those must-have talents. Every time you shield somebody, you get extra haste on your next cast. Instant cast spells and channeled spells won't use up the buff either, so you can shield somebody, then use Penance, and still have the haste left over for a greater heal. Reflective Shield is strictly a PvP talent, so don't bother with it. Strength of Soul makes it so that anytime you cast Heal on someone with the Weakened Soul debuff, the remaining duration is reduced. It would be a very useful talent if you were using Heal often, but realistically you'll only be using Heal on the members of your party that are out of range of Atonement, which is to say, you won't be using Heal very much. As a result, the 2 talent points in Strength of Soul don't get a lot of mileage, so I'd actually skip over this one. You have to get Divine Aegis to get Power Word Barrier, but Divine Aegis is an amazing talent anyway. Every time you crit with Renew Ticks, Penance, Flash Heal, Heal, Greater Heal, the Glyph of Power Word Shield, Prayer of Healing, Prayer of Mending, you get the idea, you give someone an extra Absorb. The Absorb effects will stack up to a maximum amount as well, so the more you crit, the more absorbs you're getting. Pain Suppression is effectively a targeted shield wall, and is amazing for mitigating incoming damage. Need a moment to heal someone besides the tank? Put Pain Suppression and a shield on him, take a moment to heal the others, then come back to the tank. Boss about to curb stomp your pal? Put Pain Suppression up. Train of Thought is, in fact, a useful talent, but I'm going to skip over it for now. It makes it so that every time you use Greater Heal, the cooldown on Inner Focus is reduced by 5 seconds, and every time you cast Smite, the cooldown on Penance is reduced by 0.5 seconds. Useful, but you have better places for your points at the moment. Now at this point, you'll have to put one more point into the tree to access the next tier of talents. You remember how we skipped over Twin Disciplines and Inner Focus earlier? Now would be the time to go back and put a point into one of them. I'd personally recommend Twin Disciplines, as not only does it buff your healing directly, but it buffs your smite damage, which indirectly buffs your healing too. Focused Will, like Reflective Shield, is strictly PvP, so don't worry about it. Just pick up Grace for the first 2 points on this tier. If you're focusing heals on a particular target, this will make them more effective, particularly when combined with Renewed Hope. This is basically your I'm a better tank healer now talent. So, now you have 3 points to do something with. I'd recommend finishing up Twin Disciplines for the extra healing, then going back and snagging Inner Focus. Inner Focus used to have a 2-minute cooldown, but now it's only 45 seconds, and it gives you a free Flash Heal, Greater Heal, Heal, or Prayer of Healing with an extra 25% chance to crit. You remember when I suggested earlier about popping Power Infusion, Inner Focus, and then spamming Greater Heal when you need on-demand fast heals? Well, you can also use this to really increase your group healing. Instead of spamming Flash Heal over and over every time the boss does group spike damage, just pop Inner Focus and hit Prayer of Healing. Bam! One gigantic party heal that didn't even interrupt your mana pool. Finally, you've got Power Word Barrier. It's a targetable dome that will suck up damage for the whole party. Rumor has it it's not quite working as intended, but if it is, and if it's not, it will eventually, then it's got plenty of fairly obvious utility. There's also a glyph for it to make it more useful, but I'll get back to that in the glyph section. So now you've opened up access to the other trees. You won't have enough points at level 80 to get beyond the first tier of anything, so let's just look at the best places those remaining 5 points could go. One option is Divine Fury. This reduces the cast time of Heal, Greater Heal, and Smite by 0.5 seconds. Given the amount of time you'll be spending casting Smite, and to a slightly lesser extent Greater Heal, this should get a great deal of mileage, so I definitely recommend picking this one up. From here I'd say those last 2 points basically have 2 options. Either Darkness in the Shadow Tree for 2% more spell haste, or Train of Thought back in the Discipline Tree for cooldown reduction on some of your useful abilities. I'd say which is pretty much up to your gear level. If you don't have very much haste yet, go for Darkness. If you do, go for Train of Thought. That concludes the talent portion of this guide. Glyphs for Discipline are pretty straightforward. The only prime glyphs you'd even see use out of are, potentially, Flash Heal, Penance, Power Word Shield, Power Word Barrier, Prayer of Healing, and Renew. Renew is just not a very useful spell to Discipline Priests. We don't have any talents that buff it up to any significant extent, so that's out. Flash Heal is another spell we really shouldn't be using all that much in the first place, and I've always been kind of wary of things that are only useful when someone's about to die. So I'd say the glyph of Flash Heal is out too. So that really leaves only 4 prime glyphs to choose from. Penance is probably the most obvious choice, since next to Power Word Shield, it's your bread and butter heal. Likewise, you'll be casting Power Word Shield constantly, so getting a little extra oomph out of it is great. So then it comes down to Power Word Barrier or Prayer of Healing. The Barrier one will give everybody under the barrier 10% more healing, whereas the Prayer of Healing one will make your prayer give a hot that does 20% of the overall heal. Now most of the time you'll only be casting Prayer of Healing when combined with Inner Focus, which means it's going to be very likely to crit, which means you'd get some decent mileage out of the glyph. I think at this point it's really up to what your raid composition looks like and what the content is. If Power Word Barrier is getting obliterated a couple seconds after you put it up, the glyph really isn't going to do much for you. If you find you're not using group heals very often though, then the Barrier one will give you more bang for its buck. There's really only one major glyph I would say you have to get, and that's Divine Accuracy. It ensures that your smites will always land, even on raid bosses, and you just can't afford to have them miss. After that though, the other major glyphs are kind of lackluster. Mass Dispel would be recommended for the situations you'll need it for, and otherwise I picked up Dispel Magic. The Glyph of Smite isn't useful because Holy Fire isn't useful, the Glyph of Pain Suppression isn't terribly useful outside of PvP, and Holy Nova does very weak healing now since it's split amongst all the targets it hits. Minor glyphs are really just about convenience. Levitate's nice so you don't have to worry about finding feathers to carry around, and Fade is good so that on the rare occasion you do need to use it, you're being as mana efficient as possible. I never saw the use of glyphs that help out hour-long buffs since you're, only casting them once an hour. It's not like you need Fort to be mana efficient unless you have a tank that's just enough of an ass to pull the instant you buff instead of giving you 5 seconds to get that little bit of mana back. Shadow Fiend's not a terrible third minor glyph, since it means if your Shadow Fiend gets his face wrecked, you still get something out of using it. That concludes the glyph section. So what to do about gear? Well, most of the previous calculations for gem slots concerning spell power are, in fact, still relevant. Just replace spell power with intellect. Got a red slot? Put intellect in it. Don't care about the set bonus? Put intellect in it. For the meta gem, I'd recommend the Ember Skyflare Diamond. Discipline Priests already get 15% more intellect just by selecting Discipline as a tree, and what with all the intellect stacking from gems, 2% more intellect is going to see a lot of return on the investment. Remember too that Rapture and Archangel restore mana based on total pool size, so the returns you'd see from them should outweigh the returns you'd see from the insightful Earthsiege Diamond. 25 spell power doesn't hurt either. If you do care about the set bonus, I'd largely recommend Intellect Haste gems for yellow slots and Intellect Spirit gems for blue slots. Spirit is, of course, tied to our mana regen, but once again, because of Rapture and Archangel, Intellect will see more returns than increased Spirit. This also means that as far as reforging is concerned, Spirit is a pretty attractive stat to dump in favor of something else. So what do you reforge to? Well, our Mastery bonus is actually a pretty useful one. Our shields absorb more damage. Given how many of our talents are focused around our shields, this does make Mastery attractive. However, since level 80 gear doesn't have any Mastery on it, the amount you'd get from reforging isn't going to be terribly noticeable at the moment. I would say the attractive stats after Intellect are Haste, Mastery, and Critical Strike Rating, in that order. If the item already has Haste on it, reforge to Mastery. If it doesn't, reforge to Haste. If you're Haste capped, go ahead and reforge to Mastery. Crit should be something you keep an eye out for on gear, but I wouldn't be concerned with gemming or reforging for it. That concludes the gear section, and the guide. All comments and feedback are greatly welcome, and as always, thank you for watching.